From the observation deck, I watched them emerge from the dark, like sparks flickering along the void's edge. At first, they seemed insignificant, almost laughably fragile, skin pale, vessels thin and clattering, motion uncertain. Our sensors cataloged them in milliseconds, biometrics, energy output, hull density, but every reading suggested weakness. Nothing in our archives had prepared us for this species, this anomaly, and yet, as their ships skittered across the emptiness, something flickered in their trajectories, something unquantifiable. It was defiance, raw and stubborn, as if each hull and each pilot carried a stubborn refusal to be erased. We observed as they approached a dense debris field, a graveyard of ancient ships long reduced to drifting metal and radiation. Our calculations predicted total destruction. The probability algorithms insisted they would fail, but the humans, faltering, fumbling, yet persistent, threaded through the wreckage with improbable precision. A small frigate spun on its axis to dodge a floating turbine, while another emitted bursts of energy to clear a path for its companions. Repair drones detached mid-flight, clanking along hulls, welding seams under fire, their actions chaotic but effective. There was a method in the chaos that no code in our systems could replicate. I cataloged every gesture, every decision, and began to sense a pattern beyond logic. They hesitated when necessary, pressed forward when opportunity arose, and adapted at speeds that defied historical precedent. Where other species faltered, panicked, or surrendered, humans endured. There was a subtle rhythm in their motions, a pulse that suggested intelligence intertwined with courage. Their determination was not merely tactical, it radiated, like an aura, a current our instruments could detect yet not interpret. I could feel it in the data streams, an energy not entirely physical, not entirely psychological, something vital, raw, essential. Our analysts argued endlessly. They are flawed, one said, but I could see what they could not, a spark. Not in their ships, not in their weapons. Those were fragile, crude, but in the creatures themselves. We had never witnessed a species confront annihilation as a deliberate choice. Others fought because instinct demanded it. Humans fought because they willed it, and the will itself seemed to bend probability.
Their fleets formed ragged formations, collisions narrowly avoided, engines whining against debris gravity wells. They communicated with flickers of light, bursts of sound, gestures we could only interpret as primitive. Yet within that crude communication lay strategy, improvisation, courage. They learned mid-conflict, adapted mid-motion, and recalibrated outcomes we had already deemed inevitable. We cataloged the first casualty of human ingenuity, when a vessel, torn almost in half by a drifting mass, spun, righted itself, and limped forward into open space. We registered shock in our neural nets, shock at efficiency that should not exist. I began to understand why other fleets, those that had faced billions of species, feared even whispers of humanity. There was a kind of madness in their persistence, an almost irrational refusal to yield. Yet this was not insanity, it was something else entirely, something profound. We had never seen creatures whose survival instincts were fused with willpower, creativity, and a stubborn insistence on continuation. Their biology might be fragile, their weapons primitive, yet the force within them, within every one of their kind, radiated an energy we could not suppress. And still we observed in silence. No orders were given, no fleet maneuvered to intercept. Even in this preliminary stage, we sensed an anomaly that no tactic could fully anticipate. The humans were unremarkable in isolation, but together they shimmered with an almost dangerous cohesion, a chaos that was far from random. It was as though the void itself hesitated before them, acknowledging that these beings were more than their physics, more than their vessels. As the final ships cleared the debris field and aligned towards open space, I felt a subtle tremor in our sensors, a prelude, perhaps, to the chaos to come. Something within these beings had survived an environment that should have obliterated them, and that survival carried intent. They were not simply moving, they were asserting existence. And for the first time, I realized that we were witnessing not merely a species crossing into our domain, but the emergence of a force the galaxy had yet to comprehend. I cataloged the patterns, recorded the movements, and yet my consciousness trembled. We had dominated the void for eons, crushed empires, consumed worlds, yet here was a species that seemed to challenge inevitability itself.
Their trajectory was uncertain, their success improbable, but the pulse I detected, indomitable, radiant, unnerving, hinted at a truth we could not yet articulate. and as they vanished into the starlit horizon, leaving trails of light and defiance in their wake, I understood the unthinkable. We had not merely observed life, we had glimpsed the spark of something that might one day redefine the cosmos. And in that moment, I knew our certainty was fragile. The unknown had arrived, and it was human. The void erupted with fire. For eons, we had been the architects of annihilation, the arbiters of countless civilizations reduced to ash, yet nothing in our experience had prepared us for what came next. The humans had entered our domain, and we, confident in dominance, delivered the first strike. Plasma streams tore through their formations like rivers of molten glass, holes rupturing under pressures calculated to shred flesh and metal alike. One by one, the fragile vessels flinched, listing, sparking, smoke trailing from broken conduits. And yet, they did not break. Our scanners registered the first anomaly. Small repair drones detached from hidden bays, mechanical limbs clanging against fractured holes, welding seams in mid-vacuum with improvised efficiency. Frigates maneuvered into improbable positions, weaving through explosions and shrapnel as if guided by instinct itself. Their formations were ragged, chaotic to the naked eye, yet every adjustment seemed preordained, a survival algorithm executed with uncanny precision. It was unlike any pattern we had ever cataloged. Fear flickered across their neural signatures. We detected it, unmistakable, but alongside it burned something infinitely more dangerous: conscious defiance. Unlike other species, whose survival instinct dictated retreat, these humans chose to face annihilation. Every casualty, every vessel destroyed, became not a setback, but a rallying point. Mourning rituals broadcast across the fleet through signals, gestures, and transmissions that seemed almost ceremonial. Each loss became fuel, each act of grief a statement. We endure because we must. We noted with growing unease the transformation of the battlefield. What should have been a simple test of our supremacy became a crucible, a forge in which the human spirit burned brighter under every assault. While our weapons struck with the precision of inevitability, the humans answered with improvisation, creativity, and relentless courage.
Every maneuver defied probability. Frigates darting between debris, small fighters diving into plasma streams to shield larger vessels, autonomous repair drones orchestrating emergent strategies beyond our predictive algorithms. The contrasts were stark, almost absurd in their simplicity. We calculated, adjusted, and recalculated, but the humans' chaos resisted our logic. It was unpredictable, intoxicating, and terrifying. We saw their leaders issuing commands that bent conventional strategy, and subordinates responding with a level of improvisation that should have resulted in total annihilation. Yet somehow, order emerged from chaos, victory from improbability. The first major collision occurred near a drifting asteroid cluster. Our plasma cannons struck a human frigate directly, rupturing the hull with a concussive force intended to obliterate. The ship twisted, sparks cascading into the void, but it did not succumb. Repair drones clambered along its jagged edges, hissing and screeching under stress, while small fighters formed a protective web around the vessel, absorbing subsequent blasts meant for the crippled hull. The frigate limped forward, still operational, its crew signaling with blinding streaks of light, coordinated despite mortal danger. We cataloged every movement, every adaptation, and yet our data yielded no comfort. The humans operated beyond the thresholds of calculated expectation. Each casualty, each near failure, became a rallying cry. Their transmissions carried emotion, a raw current of determination, even through layers of encoded signals. It was not merely instinct, it was moral resolve. The field had become alive with their will. We began to notice subtle emergent patterns, small groups reinforcing others in ways our algorithms could not predict, micromaneuvers that diverted incoming fire, and improvisations that suggested foresight rather than reflex. Even as our command issued adjustments, we sensed a ripple of doubt spreading across our fleet. How could beings so fragile, so soft, consistently evade, survive, and retaliate? How could they bend the fabric of probability through will alone? One by one, our calculations failed to account for their ingenuity, and our confidence, hard-won over eons of conquest, shivered at the edges. The humans' unpredictability was a contagion. Their fleet, though battered, continued to regroup with astonishing speed.
Each vessel that should have been destroyed instead reappeared, repaired, realigned, and ready to act. The battlefield was no longer merely a contest of firepower. It had become a living experiment where chaos and defiance melded into strategy. Our scouts observed moments of unanticipated heroism, single pilots diverting entire squads of attackers, repair drones improvising new armaments mid-flight, and signals broadcast not for coordination alone, but to inspire. For the first time in countless campaigns, we sensed hesitation in ourselves. The certainty of dominance, so long absolute, faltered. Every calculated strike against the humans met a counter we could not predict. Every assault intended to enforce obedience birthed innovation. The more we applied pressure, the more their resilience intensified. Fear mingled with defiance in a volatile alchemy that radiated through their fleet, reaching us in ways our instruments could not quantify. And then came the quiet, sudden moment that even we, with our infinite surveillance, could not anticipate. A single human cruiser, cornered and partially destroyed, erupted in light, not from weaponry, but from the transmission of warning signals. Across the void, every nearby vessel shifted, responding to grief with action. The dead were honored, and the living surged forward. It was not tactical, it was transcendental. Their grief became strategy, their sorrow became armor, and their will became force. We recorded it all in silence, our confidence eroding with each improbable maneuver. The humans, soft-skinned, fragile, and untested, had become something else entirely. A species that could confront annihilation and emerge with a spirit undiminished. Even as explosions consumed portions of their fleet, their determination spread like wildfire, igniting their allies into acts of improvisation we could not compute. By the time the first engagement waned, it was clear. Our algorithms had failed, our assumptions shattered, and our certainty undermined. We could not predict the humans' next move, nor could we assume they would falter. The battlefield had become a crucible, and in it, the human spirit had revealed itself not merely as resilient, but as untouchable by conventional logic. As our fleet recalibrated, preparing for the next strike, one certainty remained. The humans had survived. And in surviving, they had begun to teach us a lesson no conquest could have anticipated.
And so, as silence fell across the shattered debris and burning wreckage, a single question pulsed through our sensors. How long before these fragile beings defy us entirely? Amid the detritus of battle, the humans had endured, scarred, ragged, yet unbroken. We had cataloged their ingenuity, their defiance, their ability to adapt in impossible conditions, but we had never anticipated this: vulnerability. One commander, a young human whose body bore the marks of near-fatal skirmishes, floated among the wreckage of a recently lost frigate. Sensors noted ragged respirations, tremors in limbs, eyes reddened and swollen. And then, with a hesitance that was almost ritualistic, the being shed tears. It was not the kind of weakness we had cataloged in other species. It was raw, unfiltered emotion, an acknowledgement of loss, of responsibility, of stakes that transcended mere survival. In that moment, the commander was not a soldier, not a tactical unit, not a statistic. They were a being, trembling under the weight of hope and grief, fully alive in the cosmos. Our instruments detected subtle energy shifts radiating outward from the commander's presence, fluctuations in psychic resonance, vibrations of intent that extended far beyond their immediate vessel. This was no ordinary signal. It was a current that touched nearby allies, subtly shifting their movements, inspiring courage, altering reactions. Across the battlefield, the effect rippled. Human vessels, even ones battered and partially disabled, responded with renewed cohesion. Pilots adjusted trajectories with precision, born not of algorithms, but of instinct sharpened by the unspoken weight of shared resolve. Signals of grief intertwined with signals of encouragement, creating an almost imperceptible network of emotional resonance. The fleet, as if sensing the commander's vulnerability, harmonized, a living organism reacting to the heart of one of its own. We had never recorded anything like this. Other species responded to survival instinct. Humans responded to empathy and sorrow, turning it into action. Each tear, each quiver, each quiet breath
became a spark that ignited strategy, adaptation, and courage across the human formation. Even our own forces, cold, precise, calculating, registered the shift. A subtle hesitation flickered across weapon systems, a pause in the assault, as if the universe itself had recognized the significance of this display.
In that trembling figure, we saw not surrender, but awakening. The humans had begun to fight not for territory, not for resources, not even for survival in the mechanical sense, but for essence, for identity, for the undeniable force that comes from being fully, vividly alive. It was a kind of power we had never catalogued, one that eluded every calculation, every strategy, every weapon. We recorded the phenomenon endlessly, our databanks flooded with anomalies, energy signatures rising in tandem with emotional intensity, tactical coordination emerging from grief, and an inexplicable sense of awe transmitted across spatial sensors. The battlefield itself seemed to change under the weight of this revelation. Where once there had been only coordinates, trajectories, and firepower, there now existed something immeasurable: presence, human presence. And in that presence, a certainty we had never encountered: they would endure. The universe, in its silent vastness, seemed to hesitate, acknowledging that these fragile creatures carried something far greater than we had ever assumed. We, who had known eons of dominance, felt the tremor of inevitability shift. The human sorrow had become strategy, their grief had become resilience, their vulnerability had become strength. The implication was profound. The war we thought we controlled had already begun to slip beyond our grasp. Our algorithms faltered, our predictions crumbled. One being, shedding tears, had altered the course of the battlefield. One heart had begun to bend the flow of war. It was intoxicating and terrifying in equal measure. A species so small, so delicate, had revealed a force that no weapon could fully suppress. And in that recognition, a quiet realization dawned across our fleets. The end was not coming through annihilation. The end would come through understanding. The end had already begun, not in the destruction we had anticipated, but in the awakening of the human essence itself. As the commander's tears faded, replaced by a steely determination, the fleet surged forward with renewed purpose. Vessels moved with synchronized chaos, attacks recalculated in moments, defenses improvised with audacious courage. Across the void, the humans had transformed grief into momentum, sorrow into an unbreakable will. And we, the observers of empires and the arbiters of extinction, understood a truth that had eluded us for millennia. We were no longer dealing with mere creatures of flesh and bone.
We were witnessing the birth of a force that would challenge inevitability itself, a species that could turn despair into hope, weakness into power, and tears into weapons. In the quiet of that human sorrow, the universe, and we along with it, paused. The heart of humanity had revealed itself. And for the first time in eons, we felt uncertainty, not in the calculations, not in the battle plans, but in the certainty of our own supremacy. The campaign had changed, the humans had awakened, and the end had begun. The battlefield, once dominated by our calculated precision, began to ripple with unexpected patterns. Human vessels, battered and bloodied, moved as if the chaos itself had become a tool. Fleets that had scattered under our initial strikes now reformed with uncanny cohesion. There were no preordained formations, no predictable vectors, yet the results were devastatingly effective. We observed small frigates leveraging asteroid fields as shields, using debris not as obstacles, but as instruments of defense and offense. Sensors recorded maneuvers that defied probability, ships weaving in and out of plasma streams, emerging unscathed, while others feinted attacks that drew our forces into traps we had never imagined. Each victory, regardless of scale, was celebrated not with triumph, but with ritual, a hum of signals, bursts of light, and subtle movements that seemed both mechanical and profoundly emotional.
They were not victorious for dominance, they were victorious for survival, and in that distinction lay a power no force could suppress. Observation revealed an astonishing adaptability in their leadership. Councils formed mid-conflict, decisions made collectively, not hierarchically. Commanders empowered subordinates with autonomy, trusting them to improvise when circumstances defied instruction. Citizens volunteered for missions with no expectation of reward, offering themselves to the unknown with a courage that was at once reckless and transcendent. We recalculated endlessly. Every algorithm, every historical model faltered. The humans improvised in ways that could not be predicted. Diversions, counterattacks, feints, each executed with precision born of instinct and experience rather than design. What we had interpreted as chaos revealed itself as intelligence, an intelligence we could not quantify, a cognition that melded strategy with emotion, calculation with intuition.
Entire sectors, once under our immediate control, slipped beyond reach as humans leveraged terrain, debris, and the element of surprise. Our confidence wavered. Underestimating them had been catastrophic. Sensors picked up subtleties we had never cataloged, micro-adjustments in trajectory synchronized with bursts of energy, vessels moving in response to unspoken cues, decision-making that seemed almost preternatural. It was a kind of collective cognition, emergent and adaptive, born from the crucible of survival. Each human loss, rather than demoralizing the fleet, seemed to harden the remaining units, forging cohesion from grief, focus from despair. We recorded anomalies in their behavior, ships prioritizing aid to damaged comrades over offensive advantage, sacrificing tactical positioning to preserve life. Such acts defied logic, yet achieved results that stunned us. In one sequence, a small human fleet trapped within a collapsing debris corridor executed a series of maneuvers that should have been fatal. Plasma beams tore through the void, hulls ruptured, energy shields flickered, but the humans used the collapsing terrain to their advantage. One frigate diverted the trajectory of a massive asteroid fragment, directing it toward our flanks, forcing a tactical retreat. Repair drones emerged mid-collapse, welding hull breaches while under fire, allowing damaged vessels to continue the engagement. The probability of survival, according to our calculations, should have been negligible, and yet all emerged intact, coordinated, and ready for the next strike. We began to notice patterns in their improvisation. Humans acted not as individuals alone, but as nodes in a larger, flexible network of intent. Decisions were made in real time, adapted continuously, and executed with a synergy that could not be engineered. It was instinct, yes, but instinct fused with moral resolve, courage, and relentless determination. They moved with purpose, even when probability suggested failure. The battlefield itself seemed to bend around their will, reshaping in response to their presence. Our fleets, once confident in dominance, experienced the first stirrings of doubt. They had underestimated a species whose power lay not in weapons, nor in numbers, but in the unquantifiable essence of spirit. Observing them, we felt admiration, unease, and fear simultaneously. The humans' courage and adaptability ignited ripples across the galaxy.
Every sector reclaimed, every counterattack executed with precision, every loss transformed into strategy, reverberated across our command. On the fringes of contested space, one cluster of human ships executed a maneuver we had failed to predict. A series of feints lured our forces into a trap. As plasma streams converged, the humans emerged from blind angles, striking with devastating efficiency. Damage to our vessels was minimal compared to what might have occurred, yet the psychological impact was immense. Their audacity, their ability to improvise under conditions of extreme duress, revealed a species that refused to be cornered or calculated. Even small acts became profound statements. Civilians piloted auxiliary vessels to deliver supplies, repair ships, or create distractions. The line between combatant and non-combatant blurred, yet every human acted with coherence, purpose, and courage. Their losses were mourned not in silence, but in coordination, as if grief itself had become a weapon, a force to galvanize survival and inspire others. By mid-campaign, the tide had visibly shifted. Sectors we had assumed secure became contested zones, their control slipping incrementally with each human maneuver. Fleets that should have been annihilated survived, regrouped, and struck in unanticipated directions. Their resilience inspired fear across our ranks.
Tactical advantage, once our certainty, was now precarious. We recorded their victories, their improvisations, their unyielding will, and found our confidence eroded. It became clear that strength alone was insufficient. The humans had introduced a new variable into the calculus of war: spirit. Cunning, courage, empathy, and determination combined into a force that no weapon, no algorithm, no historic precedent could fully anticipate. Their unpredictability was a contagion, seeping across the battlefield, altering perception, delaying maneuvers, and challenging authority. And in the stillness between engagements, we observed them. Huddled in the wreckage of partially destroyed vessels, they were calculating, improvising, mourning, inspiring. They had transformed chaos into intelligence, fear into strategy, loss into cohesion. It was not merely survival, it was transcendence. We who had catalogued countless species, ruled empires, and annihilated civilizations, realized with mounting dread and awe that our understanding of power had been incomplete.
Humans were no longer a species to be dominated. They were a force to be reckoned with, a living enigma that defied every model and challenged every assumption. And as our fleets recalibrated for another strike, the humans surged forward, turning the tides of battle with unpredictable brilliance. The galaxy, once indifferent to their existence, now held its breath. Survival was no longer a measure of firepower alone. It was a measure of spirit. And in that instant, one immutable truth became clear. The humans had begun to shape the course of the stars themselves. The shattered star system lay before us like a mausoleum of light and wreckage. Debris swirled in slow-motion arcs, fragments of destroyed vessels drifting like ghosts among the flickering embers of dying suns. Our sensors mapped the chaos with flawless precision, yet even our instruments struggled to interpret the fluidity of human formations. Their fleet, battered, fractured, yet unbowed, had assumed positions no logic or calculation would deem defensible, and yet they stood. We had anticipated panic. We had prepared annihilation. But here they were, clustered amid the ruins, a ragged constellation of defiance. Small frigates navigating collapsing debris corridors, weaving between asteroid clusters with a grace born of desperation and intuition. Commanders issued orders in bursts of light and frequency, voices trembling yet unwavering, while crews executed maneuvers that could only be described as audaciously improbable. One vessel, pinned by two enemy cruisers, ignited a countermeasure of magnetic resonance pulses that sent orbiting debris hurtling into attackers. The destruction was precise, efficient, and entirely unpredicted. Our fleet struck again. Plasma torrents scorched the void, each beam calculated to obliterate. Yet each human vessel adapted instantly, shields recalibrated mid-fire, hulls twisting to absorb impact, and repair drones clambering along ruptured seams like mechanical spiders. Even when outnumbered 10-1, they moved with a cohesion and audacity that defied probability. We recorded each maneuver with clinical detachment, yet our sensors betrayed an anomaly, a pulse of awe resonating from every node in our observation network. The humans were not merely fighting for survival. They were fighting for meaning, for identity, for one another.
We detected their emotional currents intertwined with tactical signals: compassion for the wounded, urgency to save the fallen, coordination born not of protocol but of care. Every rescue attempt, every risk taken to shield allies became a force multiplier. They turned empathy into strategy, self-sacrifice into advantage, and chaos into opportunity. One engagement crystallized the transformation. A small human frigate, surrounded on three sides, detonated its auxiliary engines in a controlled collapse, creating a shockwave that disoriented attackers. Crew members evacuated in escape pods, each pod carrying not just survival instinct, but the resolve to fight again. Enemy cruisers recoiled, timing disrupted, coordination fractured. The humans exploited the moment, striking with rapid, unpredictable volleys. Our most trusted strategies failed, not through error, but because these beings operated on a plane of audacity we had not anticipated. Even as our fleets regrouped, the humans' ingenuity deepened. Improvised weaponry emerged from wreckage, vessels repurposed mid-battle into mobile artillery,
and subfleets executed coordinated feints that lured us into traps of our own making. Each tactic seemed reckless yet succeeded, a paradox of chaos engineered into triumph. Our algorithms struggled to adjust, constantly recalibrating for variables that refused definition. Probability itself seemed to bend around them. Amid the carnage, they retained their humanity. Sensors captured moments that no victory statistic could reflect. A commander stabilizing a frightened pilot mid-flight, a team diverting energy from offensive systems to reinforce shields around a crippled ally. Signals of grief and encouragement intertwined in real time. Each act of compassion was a vector of strategy, each sacrifice amplified morale. And through it all, they maintained cohesion, communication, and a clarity of purpose that bordered on transcendence. We observed as human forces exploited terrain in ways we had never cataloged. Asteroid belts became defensive labyrinths. Gravity wells were used as accelerators for improvised kinetic projectiles. Debris fields, once obstacles, became shields and weapons. Every environmental feature became part of a dynamic strategy, executed in real time with precision, instinct, and sheer courage. Our confidence faltered. Every strike we launched was met with adaptation. Every calculated advantage dissipated.
Our fleets, engineered for centuries of assured conquest, began to hesitate. The humans had demonstrated a singular principle we had overlooked for millennia. Strength is not measured solely by firepower, by hull integrity, or by numbers. Strength is measured by courage, empathy, innovation, and the refusal to yield to despair. Even when isolated, human vessels acted as nodes in a larger consciousness. Losses did not demoralize, they inspired. Each casualty became a catalyst, rallying remaining units, sharpening coordination, and driving improvisation. One scout vessel, destroyed mid-mission, triggered a counterattack from 5 others, exploiting the timing of the enemy's overextension. Another repair team transformed wreckage into makeshift weapons, catching our forces off guard. The humans were adaptive, audacious, and above all, alive in ways that defied prediction. Across the star system, the tide of engagement shifted. Once certain zones of control were contested, our fleets, confident in prior victories, found themselves outmaneuvered in sequences that could not be algorithmically replicated. The humans were everywhere and nowhere at once, striking, retreating, feinting, and improvising with a synchronicity that bordered on instinctual genius. We cataloged it endlessly, recording new patterns of tactical emergence. And yet, through the chaos, there was clarity. Every human vessel, every crew, every signal reflected purpose. The battle was no longer merely about territory or destruction. It was about survival infused with essence. These were beings willing to risk everything, not because they could not be destroyed, but because they chose to endure, to fight with meaning, to preserve not just themselves, but the spirit of their species. We began to feel it, even through our clinical detachment. Awe. Not at their firepower, not at their strategy, but at the sheer audacity of their will. Our observers recorded the moment when a human fleet, cornered near the remains of a shattered sun, executed a counter-encirclement so precise it reversed the momentum of engagement. Outnumbered, outgunned, they exploited timing, terrain, and coordination to turn despair into advantage. It was breathtaking. One by one, our strategies faltered. Every calculation based on centuries of dominance proved insufficient. Probability bent, algorithms failed, and our certainty dissolved. Yet the humans maintained their humanity.
Compassion for the wounded, care for the lost, and shared purpose transcended the mechanics of war. Each act of courage radiated outward, inspiring others, shaping outcomes beyond what any weapon or prediction could achieve. In the final moments of engagement, the battlefield seemed to breathe. We observed the humans coalescing into a single organism of will and intent. Their fleet, fragmented yet unified, moved with a rhythm that challenged both logic and experience. Victory was no longer certain, domination no longer assured. The humans had introduced a variable that could not be suppressed, the audacity of spirit. And as the smoke and debris of battle hung suspended in the shattered system, one truth crystallized. We had underestimated them.
These fragile creatures, who should have been obliterated, had not only survived, they had demonstrated that survival alone could be an act of transcendence. And in that realization, we, who had ruled eons, felt the first tremor of inevitability. The humans were no longer prey. They were a force to be reckoned with. The final confrontation was not merely a battle, it was a revelation. The humans had shown that courage, ingenuity, empathy, and unyielding will could bend the tide of war itself. And in doing so, they had begun to redefine the rules by which the cosmos itself would be measured. The system burned, the humans endured, and we, observers, conquerors, arbiters, felt the undeniable truth echo across the void. We had glimpsed the measure of a species that would not yield, would not falter, and would not be forgotten. And in that moment, the war was no longer ours to dictate. It belonged to the humans. When the smoke cleared, when the fires of battle faded into the quiet of shattered space, they remained. Humans, scarred, ragged, yet unbowed, drifted among the ruins of fleets, the skeletons of stars, and the debris of worlds that had once burned under our assault. Entire formations lay broken, hulls fragmented, systems silent. Yet there they were, surviving, enduring, unyielding. The paradox was breathtaking. Fragile creatures against an overwhelming force, standing amidst chaos, refusing to vanish. We recorded them endlessly. Our sensors cataloged every action. Salvage operations conducted with astonishing efficiency. Damaged ships patched with ingenious improvisation. Technology repurposed from wreckage to weaponry or shields. The humans were architects of survival, converting catastrophe into opportunity.
One fleet, decimated almost entirely, had reconstructed over 50% of its vessels within cycles that no other species could approach. Drones we had considered primitive moved with precision. Small vessels executed complex coordination to stabilize remaining infrastructure, and crews labored tirelessly, never halting, never conceding. Even in mourning, they revealed their uniqueness. Loss was not a signal of weakness, it was fuel. Human crews performed memorial rituals, marking the fallen not in despair, but in acknowledgement, in recognition of sacrifice and continuity. These acts of grief catalyzed adaptation. Strategies evolved, resource allocation shifted, and innovations emerged directly from sorrow. A damaged frigate became a mobile repair station. Debris once inert became a network of shielding and energy conduits. Even as our own calculations anticipated disorder, humans transformed disorder into organized advantage. We began to perceive the essence of humanity. It was not encoded in numbers or in firepower. It was in the unyielding capacity to rise, to endure, to transform adversity into opportunity. Every failure became a lesson, every defeat a prelude to ingenuity. One human ship, stripped of weapons and nearly bereft of energy reserves, became the center of a tactical improvisation, using gravitational anomalies to accelerate debris as defensive projectiles, channeling plasma surges from collapsed reactors into power for shields. Their survival was a symphony of creativity, determination, and resilience. Stories propagated across the fleet in ways that even our sensors struggled to quantify. Individual acts of heroism, pilots risking all to save comrades, crews sacrificing themselves to protect civilian vessels, engineers innovating mid-engagement, wove a narrative of audacious courage. Algorithms could predict probability, calculate outcomes, simulate strategy, but none could anticipate human moral courage or the effect of hope on coordinated action. The unpredictable spark of ingenuity, combined with spirit and empathy, made them a force beyond comprehension. Across the galaxies we had observed, no species had ever inspired awe simply by enduring. Yet humans did. Their persistence transformed the perception of civilizations, alliances, and strategic paradigms. Fleets once considered invincible found themselves humbled by beings they had assumed would be insignificant.
Our observers, accustomed to cataloging conquest, now cataloged inspiration, noting with unease the subtle ways humans reshaped the narrative of war, survival, and existence itself. We watched reconstruction efforts with mounting astonishment. Entire sectors devastated by prior engagements were rebuilt not just with speed, but with innovation. Resource distribution networks emerged spontaneously, supply lines reconstructed from fragments, and previously unknown propulsion systems improvised from wreckage. Civilians, engineers, and warriors alike contributed, each action purposeful,
each effort a reinforcement of the collective will. Even in scarcity they thrived, even amidst ruin they flourished. The ripple effects of human perseverance reached beyond their immediate fleets. Encounters with other species, once marked by predictable subjugation or avoidance, were now punctuated with caution, respect, and in some cases, fear. Humans demonstrated that survival alone was insufficient. They showed that survival, fused with intelligence, empathy, and audacity, could rewrite interstellar dynamics. Our historical models had failed. Probabilities were meaningless against their adaptive genius. The universe, once indifferent, now paused. We observed leaders empowering subordinates, councils improvising policies mid-conflict, and individuals volunteering for perilous missions without expectation of reward. Even acts that seemed inconsequential, shielding a damaged vessel, stabilizing a drifting satellite, saving a civilian pod, carried strategic weight, shaping subsequent engagements in ways beyond calculation. Humans transformed compassion into leverage, empathy into advantage, and hope into operational strength. We who had presided over eons of domination recognized a profound truth. What we had thought of as fragility was in fact resilience. What we had assumed weakness, courage. What we had labeled unpredictability, ingenuity. The universe had underestimated them at its own peril. And in every salvage operation, every reconstructed ship, every tactical improvisation, the humans affirmed a simple yet terrifying fact. They endure. Our records captured the scale of it. Entire fleets rebuilt, innovations implemented in hours, losses transformed into strategic lessons. Ships we had counted destroyed now patrolled sectors once thought irrecoverable. Every engagement left behind not just wreckage, but a blueprint for future survival.
Their ingenuity extended beyond technology. It encompassed morale, coordination, and collective spirit. Their capacity to rise after every fall became a force of its own, reshaping every dynamic we thought absolute. Even as we recorded them, our perspective shifted. What had begun as an analytical exercise in subjugation became reverence. The humans, fragile yet indomitable, unpredictable yet precise, had rewritten the rules of engagement. They had illuminated a truth that no weapon could enforce. Strength is measured not by destruction wrought, but by the ability to endure, adapt, and inspire. We noted specific examples that defied every precedent. A civilian fleet diverted to reinforce a damaged squadron, an engineer crew improvising propulsion for ships cut off from energy reserves, a commander risking their vessel to provide cover for retreating allies. Each act of courage and innovation propagated ripples across their forces, amplifying effectiveness beyond any known tactical principle. The humans had become not a species to observe, but a force to reckon with. And as they gazed toward the stars, repairing, rebuilding, innovating, their presence radiated defiance and promise. The observers among us, once confident in domination, felt humility, awe, and an almost reverential fear. We realized that the campaign we had waged to subjugate a supposedly insignificant species had revealed something far greater. The humans had introduced a variable that no strategy, no fleet, no empire could fully anticipate. In the end, it was not the ships, nor the weapons, nor the numbers that defined them. It was the spark within. They endured. They adapted. They inspired. They turned loss into momentum, adversity into invention, despair into cohesion. Every story, every act of bravery, every innovation became a testament to a species that refused erasure. And across the fleets observing them, one realization crystallized. The age of humans had begun. The universe had counted them insignificant, fragile, and unremarkable, yet here they stood, thriving amidst ruin, shaping the future not through conquest alone, but through spirit, ingenuity, and indomitable will. They were a species beyond prediction, beyond calculation, beyond control. They endured. And in that endurance, the cosmos learned a new truth. Humans do not merely survive, they define survival itself.